Big welcome to Damyant from Oppo with a huge career in Indian marketing. Welcome, Damyant.
Thank you.
Now, before we get into the process of this, I'm obsessed by one thing you told me before, which is Sachin Tendulkar's socks. How on earth can this start a show about innovation? I've got my red socks. Tell us about his socks.
Yeah, it's a bit of a story actually, and I think the lead up to what you kind of introduced the show as, I think unlearning and understanding that most innovations come from a relevant question being asked. And I think in the context of Sachin, it was essentially, this was 2007, and he essentially called us up and said, I need to kind of get an upgrade in my socks.
This is Adidas.
And this is an Adidas. And so basically I did what any good boarding school boy would do, which is I picked the most expensive pair of socks in the range and I sent it to him. 2 days later, he calls back and says, nonsense, doesn't work for me. Because what I sent him were a usual pair of towel socks. And if you're playing cricket, at the international stage, you're on ground for like 8, 9, 10 hours. And what he wanted was a solve, and this was like the latter part of his career. And what he wanted was a solve with a sock that would not only give him the optimal amount of cushioning, but would also kind of manage the level of sweat that you kind of go throughout a day. And so what he wanted was not a regular towel sock, but something that would kind of enable him to wear the same pair throughout the day and allow him to feel better, allow him to kind of not get blisters, etc. So it was a pretty tall ask.
And this is why you're Sachin Tendulkar, right? Constant incremental innovation, no little detail left untouched.
Absolutely, and I think socks is probably the last thing most athletes would think about, but this is Sachin, right? And thankfully, because it was Sachin, you know, we went into a project which literally took us like 8 months from start to finish, where every second, third week we would kind of create samples of socks where we would kind of vary the level of polyester versus cotton, thickness of the sock. Sachin, I remember, sent us a pair of baby socks that he kind of found in the UK, which had these rubber pellets on the bottom, saying that this could probably help him grip inside the shoe better. So when he's fielding or when he's batting, he'd probably get that extra level of support in the shoe, etc. So we went through a whole lot of iterations with the sock, but the essence was he wanted something that literally would allow him to not feel that there was anything holding him back.
Okay, Damyant, so you've got the key customer,
yeah,
Sachin input,
yeah,
and you're going through an iterative process, but tell us practically, how did that work with the team? Did one person look at polyester, another cotton? How did the magic of innovation actually happen?
It was actually iterative, right? I mean, and so for us, you know, what we did was we kind of used the learnings from a lot of different sports, right? So Adidas being an Olympic sports brand, we obviously had learnings from a host of different Olympic events. We used actually learnings from even our tennis players. So one of the things we realized was when we send Sachin a pair of socks that were out of the box, socks that are created in the factories would still have a little bit of starch in them, right? And so when you wore them the first time, they would feel sort of slippery, wouldn't feel as comfortable. And so this was a learning that we got from Leander Paes, who's another tennis great. And he said he always wore his socks to matches after washing them. And so when we started kind of creating these socks with the right amount of blend, we actually used to pre-wash them and send them to Sachin, because then they would kind of have the right feel, match feel, to kind of enable him to kind of get a real sense of the product. So the process was iterative. The process was literally of, you know, creating a product which would have like 25, 75% ratios. The thickness would kind of be something that would vary as well. How much cushioning you put on what part of the foot would vary. So it was a process that was iterative, but it took us time purely because Sachin, as you would expect, is a very exacting personality. And so he just wouldn't relent with something that he was not really very happy with.
And was it strangely exciting? I mean, I've never thought socks are particularly exciting, but actually there's a funny thing, isn't there, about innovation where the oddest subjects can be innately very interesting if you get into it.
Absolutely, and I think what we ended up with was a product that was, I wish it was the age of social media, because it's such an amazing story to tell, right, about the lens to which you've gone to kind of create a product that you don't even kind of give an afterthought to. So the amount of work that went into the creation of that sock, it was a no-seam sock. I actually have a couple of pairs, and 16 years in, I still wear them right now. So we basically created a tank of a sock that this gentleman loved, and, you know, hopefully it helped him make his...
Well, it's an awesome way to start our inner show. But sort of moving up from the socks further up, let's talk about this thing, right?
Yeah.
You talked about this thing being the little monster, right? Tell us a bit about, because you assume with innovation that it's just constantly doing more, but actually with this fellow, it's a bit about doing less, isn't it? Talk to us, particularly with your current Oppo experience and Apple, about how you think about tech marketing.
Yeah.
And is less more?
Yeah. So you know, the age of smartphones is what we've lived through now for about a decade and a half. And what we're kind of, you know, increasingly trying to do at Oppo is, these are amazing productivity devices. You can't live without one. But you know what we're trying to do is, for example, with the product that we've just launched recently, we're trying to kind of put the tech into the background and make it less intrusive. And so what we've done with the Oppo Find N3 is essentially let the product sit in the background and still behave and act as the productivity device that it's supposed to, without it necessarily intruding into your life. So what we've done, for example, is the cover screen of the phone literally runs 40 apps. So you don't even need to kind of lift your phone or unfold it for you to kind of use your phone to make a call or otherwise send a message back. What we've realized is, you know, smartphones, of course, add a lot of, people literally run their careers and professions on a smartphone, but they've also been very intrusive. And so what we're trying to do is bring a sense of balance in how smartphones behave and the role that they play in your lives. And we've done this through various ways. This, of course, is one way. The other, for example, is this notion of nomophobia, which is the fear that people have of not having the phone on them, or the fear of their phones running out of battery.
Yeah, it's like mileage anxiety in an EV, right?
Correct. So this notion of nomophobia is again something that, you know, we've tried to kind of ease by introducing innovations like we call it Super VOOC, but you can literally charge your phone, an Oppo device, in less than 10 minutes to 100%, right? This basically means that even if you've kind of forgotten overnight to charge your phone, you can literally do it between you going into breakfast and finishing off breakfast and your phone's fully charged. So there are these small little iterations that we're kind of making, this what we call this notion of iterative innovation, or what we kind of credit this as being innovation that impacts society positively at large. So, so this notion of, you know, how can we improve lives on an ongoing basis? So.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because innovation's not abstract in the sense that innovation has to have a purpose. And I'm sure with our other guests, we'll talk a bit about, you know, what is the social purpose of innovation. But before we get to that, Damyant, you know, you've done Adidas, you've done the mighty Apple, Oppo now, you know, you've had a big career and you're only really in the second innings of a sort of 5-day test. But where are you at with innovation? What's your personal innovation credo? Do you have one? Is it just process? Is it light bulb? How do you think about that? Yeah.
So you know, I think there are a couple of philosophies that I follow in life, and I think the first one is simply about you know, you should not go through your life without you know, evolving as you move along, right? And I think if you think about the tech world, it's a bit like having a software upgrade over a period of time. But I think going through life without acknowledging that you need to kind of evolve and change on an ongoing basis, I think is the first part. So this notion of continuous improvement, this sense of always being seeking, being curious is, I think, super important, right? And I think this is something which is embedded in me since I was a kid. My dad was in the army, you know, and we would basically move. And
you were in like 8 schools by the age of 8, practically.
Exactly. And so we would basically move schools. We would move cities every 2-3 years, and I think what it did to me was essentially force me to kind of, you know, evolve as a person. You were a very different person if you were in Bombay versus what you were in a small city called Firozpur in Punjab. So you learn to kind of evolve as an individual, and I think that was one part of it, which is this constant sense of being curious and improving oneself over a period of time. So I think that was one element of it. And the other one, which, since you're talking about context of sport, the other one that I really kind of find useful is what the All Blacks use, which is this notion of divine discontent. You know, and the All Blacks, as you know, are one of the most successful teams in team sports. And the notion of divine discontent essentially is never being happy with where you are and what you might have done, because there's always something in what you've done or what you've created or what you've put out in the world in which you should seek the imperfection. Right? You should always kind of try and figure out, what can I do better? What is it that I can kind of improve even further? Because this notion of divine discontent can be seen as being perennially unhappy, but on the other side, it's also the sense of constantly seeking ways to kind of self-improve. And so for me, that's another element that I kind of draw a lot of inspiration from in the way I think and behave.
Damyant, I think that's a fantastic place to sign off, despite the fact that we'll now suffer divine discontent having to terminate our session. But a bit about socks, a bit about phones, a bit about the All Blacks. You've come a long way from Firuzpur. Thank you so much for being on Trailblazers. We really appreciate it.
Cheers, thanks.